Hi, everybody. Welcome.
Hi, everyone.
I'm Kate Fiegel-Miller. I'm the Assistant Director of Service Learning at CCSJ at Loyola.
And I am Paola Pascual Ferra. I am an assistant professor in the communication department here at Loyola.
So the presentation we're going to share with you today is from a presentation that we did at the AJCU Justice Conference this past summer.
Yeah, in Seattle.
And we decided to collaborate on a data project. Actually, a couple of years ago, Paola walked into my office and said, "Look at all those binders full of data. We should really do something with those." And so, we do surveys of our service learning students every semester. We've been doing this for more than 10 years. We have a ton of data. And so I took Paola up on the offer to take a look at that data over time. So here's what we came up with. Okay, so this is part of the Assessment for Impact workshop, telling the story of community engagement. We call our presentation Serve, Reflect, Repeat, Findings from a Decade of Service Learning Courses. Just to briefly overview our service learning program, I imagine many of you watching this will already be familiar with our program, but we have been doing an official course designation process for service learning since the fall of 2006. We think we have pretty high standards for how we define designated service learning courses, and these 7 items are kind of our criteria for service learning courses. We do require instructors to be formally trained in the service learning pedagogy. Service learning courses are ones where the service is fully integrated into the course in the activities and also the learning objectives for the course. Partnership and reciprocity with the community is absolutely critical. And our service learning courses are ones where the partnership really is about justice, diversity, and leadership themes that are sort of part of our university's mission and values, both for graduates and undergraduate students. Service learning courses always include preparation, they always include structured reflection, and they always include assessment mechanisms, including the survey that we've based this on, but also we expect that faculty are assessing the service learning within the course. We often talk about service learning as program-based or project-based. Sometimes courses are a little bit of both, but I think of program-based as, I think was perhaps more traditional, more of our more original service learning courses where the students serve at a program, their time is contributing to a program with a community partner already in existence, such as serving meals, maybe tutoring students at an after-school program. Whereas in project-based service, students are really using their skills to produce some kind of deliverable. And our communications department is famous for having project-based service.
That's correct.
Most of our courses are service learning is optional, so it's offered but not required within the course, though a few courses require service learning. Our program also, we have a faculty director for community engaged learning and scholarship who helps with pedagogy issues, and I also help with partnership development and with logistics as the assistant director of service learning. So then also we have a lot of support from our center as a whole, our student leaders who are liaisons with a number of community partners that we work with. And that's a really great resource available to faculty who teach this. And currently we are running usually about 25 to 30 sections of service learning every semester. So our presentation is about reflection in service learning in particular. So I want to share about kind of some of the literature about reflection in service learning, what we know about it. Service learning itself is considered to be a high-impact practice in higher ed. It's widely known to yield greater learning. And in particular, reflection in service learning is considered to be kind of the key to success of the service learning pedagogy. Reflection is how you knit together the service experience with the rest of the course, the readings, the course objectives, the theories that you're studying. Without having that reflection to pull it together, a lot of times students can miss the meaning or sort of fail to glean the relevance of their service experience to what they're studying. And reflection has been found to relate to a lot of outcomes connected to civic learning. Some of the best practices that we found in service learning in our instructor training course, our faculty fellows seminar, we talk about the 4 C's or the 5 C's from Eiler and Giles, that reflection should be connected, so it's kind of relevant to the course, continuous, so reflection doesn't just happen one time at the end of the semester, but it's really integrating the service and the rest of the course material all along. It's contextualized, so it makes sense with your course, the type of reflection you're doing. There might be some types of service where it makes perfect sense for students to be having a little bit of informal reflection just on their way back from service in the van. Whereas in some, it might be perfectly expected that students are going to do some sort of skit presentation in class. That, you know, maybe that really fits with the course they're doing, if it's an acting class or something sort of artistic. Reflection should be challenging, so it's always taking students deeper to get more meaning out of the theories that they're studying, to get more meaning out of the service. And finally, coaching or feedback, that really strong reflection comes along with this feedback that students are given from the instructor. So they're not just left to their own devices to answer the prompts, but that sometimes they get instruction in how to do better the next time around. Various scholars have talked about the types or styles of reflection in different ways. You'll see when we get to our findings that we have a list of kind of types of reflection that we have categorized ourselves. You can see here some of the types of reflection that some have listed. They've categorized them as reading, writing, doing, and telling, or writing, discussion, activities, and media. Also these sort of learning styles. These are all kind of just different ways of categorizing types of reflection, and really just getting at the idea that reflection is not just one thing. It's not just papers that you write talking about a service experience, but that it can happen in all these different kinds of dimensions. It can be really active. It can, pull together different types of materials. They might be doing a reflection, that's pulling in an article as well as the service experience. They might be doing something live. They might be doing some sort of simulation activity in class. There are lots of kinds of ways that we can do reflection. Some best practices of reflection also include doing it a lot. Again, Eiler's first one here, this is kind of the same as continuous, that reflection would happen before, during, and after service. Others have found that it's good to combine different types of service learning. Think about who you're doing it with. What are you reflecting on? Reflection is also necessary, but it's not sufficient. It needs to be carefully designed and assessed to help students make the connections. So while reflection is the glue, you're not just going to automatically get great success just by doing any old reflection, but it really does need to be kind of relevant and intentionally constructed.
Okay, so we're going to tell you a little bit about our data, and as Kate mentioned, I was very excited about the prospect of looking at this data set. As you'll see, the data set itself had over 8,700 responses. And I'll tell you a little bit about how we went about dealing with missing data and just the form of validation that we did. But in the end, we ended up with responses from 8,716 students that were valid for our analysis. So I was very excited to be dealing with this volume of responses. I'll tell you a little bit about this later, but the reason why I got into this project too was because one of the learning outcomes that this survey assesses or attempts to assess is communication skills. And obviously I teach communication here at Loyola, so I was interested in that as a learning outcome and how service learning was tied to that. But then there were other things that also brought me to this project. So just an overview of the survey. So if you are a service learning teaching faculty, you've seen this survey before. It is sent out to students at the end of the semester. Students basically self-select or volunteer to fill out the report. And unless, at least in my course, I don't force them to fill out the survey. So other courses might vary, but at least in my course, usually it's people who want to complete the survey do so. So it's a self-report survey. It goes out to all students who are in service learning designated courses as well as service learning optional courses, and it goes both to service learning participants and non-service learning students or students who have chosen the alternative track in the course. So that's a really good way to compare how learning outcomes vary between these two groups. We measure 10 or 12 learning outcomes total?
I think there are 12, there might be 17 in this.
There's a lot of learning outcomes. We'll look at them
It should
one
be 12
by
in this,
one.
in this large data set. Yeah.
But we measure a variety of learning outcomes, and some of them may not have been outcomes that were included in the professor's course objectives. So that's actually very important as well for faculty to know that in addition to your own faculty teaching evaluations, this other form of evaluation is looking at things that you may not be thinking about as you are teaching the course necessarily. Nearly 500 course sections over 10 years are included in this data set. So we have data starting in the fall of 2006 all the way to the spring of 2016. As I said, we have information from 8,716 students. Of those students, 63% participated in the service learning option or service learning designated course. So that's a good percentage to look into. And we also are very happy that even though it's not evenly split, we have another substantial percentage to compare our service learner to non-service learner students. In terms of gender, Loyola, especially I guess going back maybe 2 years, was more heavily female skewed, so that this makes sense that the data would be 73% female, 21% male. In addition, when you think about the typical student that does service learning,
or the typical student that signs up for a service learning
exactly,
class.
that's what I meant. Yeah.
We generally
Yeah,
find
that
that
too,
there
that
are
too.
women are kind of overrepresented in
Yep.
the classes that offer service learning, and we're not exactly sure why.
And that's another thing to consider. Median age is 20, makes sense for our college population. So just this is the demographics of the data. Of course, you may be able to go in and then look at specific courses, how many are represented from each of the departments. We didn't go to that level of analysis in this round because there's so much. I mean, there's so much data. There are so many ways to look at it. So right now we're just focused on number of reflection styles used by the professor and the effect on learning outcomes. So we had several hypotheses that we wanted to test with our data. Right now, we're going to look at this, but in future presentations, we might be sharing others with you. First is we wanted to see if there was a significant and positive correlation between the number of reflection styles used. And when we say number of reflection styles, it's not just the frequency, but also the variety of reflection
type.
styles. So
Yeah.
if you do for writing assignments, for written reflections, that's great, but we are more interested in looking at what if you do one writing reflection, one in-class discussion, one video journal, so differences in reflection styles, and how students felt that the professor integrated the service into the course. And we'll look at that variable. Kate will explain that in a minute. The second hypothesis is there a significant and positive correlation between the scores for integration of service into the course by the professor and the scores for learning outcomes? And then we go into the third hypothesis, which is a two-pronged hypothesis. The first is there is a significant and positive correlation between the number of reflection styles used and the scores for learning outcomes. And then the number of reflection styles used significantly predicts the scores for learning outcomes. And we did regressions for this.
So just to say a little bit more about what our variables are, the next two slides kind of reflect back to what our question items were on the survey. So for number of reflection styles used, we're not measuring like how many reflection assignments were there, right, but how many types of reflection styles. This is how we have asked students on the survey about the reflection they did. So you can see the list of reflection styles that were available for them to select. One of the things we discussed was that a couple of the things on this list are not necessarily items that the professor had control over. Mm-hmm. You can see discussions with my family or discussions with my peers outside of class, even discussions at my service site. These are not necessarily in the professor's ballpark, but they do sort of measure what the student's experience was with the service and sort of kind of help predict their outcomes. So when we looked at this, for the part where we're looking at a correlation, we just used the number of types of reflection that a student chose. For a different analysis, we decided to slice it a different way. Mm-hmm. And in that case, we sort of divided the students into two groups. Those who checked off only 1 to 3 types of reflection used, and those who checked off 4 or more reflection styles. So then we had these two groups, and we could sort of compare them against each other for their learning outcomes. So after reflection mm-hmm. styles, the next variable we looked at was integration of service into the course. We thought that this was really connected to, sort of both the amount of reflection that was being done and the learning outcomes for the course. And there were 3 major items that we looked at to kind of measure how strongly the service was integrated into the rest of the course. And so one was the professor clearly explaining the learning objectives, and then the other 2 were that service enhanced the course learning and that the course learning enhanced service. So we always kind of talk about that we want those 2 things, the service and the learning, to be sort of mutually reinforcing. So we asked students about what their experience was with that. The list of 12 learning outcomes is here. And as Paula said, these are not necessarily all outcomes that the faculty members were necessarily intentionally teaching toward, but these are based on some of the literature that exists about some of the effects that service learning can have as a high impact practice. So, and we have been asking these questions since way back. You can see also that we've made some tweaks programmatically based on our own university, asking about service learning as a cause of reflecting on faith or spirituality. Right about here. And also increase my understanding of the Jesuit value of men and women for and with others. So that's pretty specific to our institution. So it's a lot there, but there you have it. Those are our learning outcomes.
You will see several sets of findings in the next several slides. The first is we wanted to look at what types of reflection do students recollect using in the course, and this is something that also we will touch later on in the discussion. Some students may have a better recollection of what happened in the course at the end of the semester. Others may remember some, but not all. So, we're also very mindful of that in terms of the types of reflection. So we start with electronic discussions, and then kind of move clockwise in this pie chart. So this is electronic discussions. This is in-class discussion, discussions at service side, discussions with peers outside of the class, which I found really fascinating. And I think it's an opportunity for faculty to really think about how they are encouraging students to talk about service outside of the course with peers in their dorm rooms, at the service side, with their parents, because it seemed to us, and we'll go into this in a little bit, that students really recalled those conversations, sometimes even more than maybe the assignments. And that is definitely something that I think has a lot of potential. Then moving on to discussions this would be discussions with family, journals. So if you are a professor who has assigned as part of the service learning aspect of your course a journal, I know I have done that in the past. That's definitely, especially if you do it throughout the entire semester, it becomes such a big part of the course experience for the student that obviously they're gonna recall that. Papers, right? So a lot of students report mostly doing papers as a form of reflection, moving on to specific projects, reflection sessions and events outside of class, presentations, and then others. And so you see also here, this slide shows you the difference between service learning participants and non-service learning participants. Now, just so that you understand the non-service learning participants graph, this is in response to the question that asked non-service learners, do you recall types of service learning reflection that happen within the course? We wanted to know how they're learning about service learning from the students that are doing it. And so most of them obviously report having heard through in-class discussions, which makes sense. 12% reported hearing about them from electronic discussions. So this could be just an advanced forum on Moodle. 22% reported oral presentations. So one of the things that Kate and I have always spoken about is, if we do not get every single student in the class to do service learning, how can we make sure that that service learning experience is also having an effect on the students that for one reason or another choose not to do service learning. And so this becomes really important for faculty interested in this as a pedagogy. You were going to say something?
No, I just really like this slide and how it shows that our faculty really are using a variety of different types of reflection styles. I think sometimes faculty as individuals can sort of fall into the trap of teaching service learning the same way over and over again, and they go, yeah, I do reflection, but I'm just not sure how to make it more exciting. And clearly we really have a whole set of colleagues who have done different things with reflection, and so this is already a reality at our institution that we have these varieties going on.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so moving on, we're looking at learning outcomes. So the questions in this survey ask students to report how effective the course and service learning experience had been for those different learning outcomes. So do you remember the actual anchors, the actual was it highly effective? Right now, we will have to look into that. I forgot to bring it up, but obviously it goes from highly effective to not effective at all. And so students who do service learning tend to score higher on learning outcomes across the board. So students who are service learners tend to report that courses are very effective in helping them learn about active citizenship, social responsibility, Jesuit values, career skills, reflection on faith and spirituality, getting exposed to new points of view, thinking reflectively, et cetera, et cetera. So this seems to be across the board. Obviously, as a researcher, I'm interested in understanding whether this is so, or just this is the nature of the service learner student, who tends to also be someone who values learning and may in that way be more receptive to just the value of education as a whole. But this is what we found in terms of just raw data. Yes.
So I would just point out that the control group that's missing here is the students who weren't in a service learning class at all.
Yeah.
Right? This is comparing within the same class the students who actually did the service experience with, in many classes, the students who were in that class but didn't do the service at all. So we actually, I think a fair hypothesis for another experiment would be to look at the difference between, comparing those two groups with a third group in the same class that wasn't service learning at all. And we don't have that represented here. And the other thing I would just point out is that it's not particularly surprising that the service learners, the ones who have the service experiences, have higher outcomes on these, because these are learning outcomes that are kind of specifically asking about the types of things that you can imagine service learning more explicitly doing.
Yeah.
So,
all right, moving on. So remember, the first hypothesis was that there is a significant and positive correlation between the number of reflection styles used and scores for integration of service in the course, like Kate offered the operationalization for. And we did find that was the case, that there was a significant positive correlation between number of reflection types and the three ways in which we measured integration of course and service. So the professor clearly explained the learning objectives, was positively and significantly correlated with the different learning outcomes, was service enhanced, that the service enhanced understanding of the course material, and that course materials enhanced understanding of service were also, significantly and positively correlated with the number of reflection styles. I apologize, I said learning outcomes. It should be number of reflection styles. So it does seem, based on the data that we have, that the more you, and this I think makes sense, but it's sometimes hard to put into practice. And I guess, if anything, this data encourages us to really try to push ourselves more in terms of the number of different types of reflection styles that we use in the class when we're teaching service learning, because it does seem that the more you include, then the higher the way in which the obviously professor is perceived as doing a good job in integrating service learning into the course.
Yeah, this kind of shows us that the number of reflection styles, that reflection really is the hyphen between service and learning. It's the glue that holds together the service with the rest of the course.
Yeah. All right. So, So as Kate had explained, we divided students who did service learning into those who reported 1 to 3 different types of reflection versus those who reported 4 or more types of reflection. And we did this just to compare the mean differences in scores between the group, just doing an ANOVA. And we did find that those students who reported having done 4 or more different types of reflection had overall a higher mean score for each of the the 3 different ways in which we measured course integration, service learning course integration, than those who reported only 1 to 3 types of reflection.
So that supports that same first hypothesis.
Yeah. So now we go on to learning outcomes, which I think was really what we wanted to focus in and see what was going to happen. And we were interested in seeing, well, how well does the professor integrate service learning into the course, and how is that associated with higher learning outcomes? And we did find that there were significant and positive correlations between the scores of integration of service into the course by the professor and the scores that students reported for their learning outcomes.
As you can see, for all 12 learning outcomes that we
yeah, the
measured.
correlation was significant at the 0.01 level. And I think, let me just highlight some that might be, so this is obviously thinking reflectively. So to the question, the course material enhanced by the service learning experience was highly correlated with, did this course help me improve my reflection skills, to help me think reflectively. So that was a very positive outcome that we saw. Same thing as service enhanced by the course material and thinking reflectively. So you can just take a look at the chart here and see, where things are kind of measuring up. The ones that seem to be just naturally stronger. Other ones are still significant, but maybe smaller correlations, social awareness. If you are a faculty teaching service learning, you might want to think about all these things, how is your explanation of objectives? If you're explaining it objectives clearly, how will that have an effect on the learning outcome of students, especially when it comes to service learning, which for some faculty can be a little complicated to balance out throughout the entire semester. Do you want to add anything to this slide?
I think so.
Okay. So now we're looking at the number of reflection styles and how those were associated with stronger learning outcomes. And again, correlations were significant at the 0.01 level. But overall, the correlations are a little low. So in terms of the number of types of reflection and each of the learning outcomes, I think we have the highest one being new points of view. But other things like, for example, active citizenship, which is one that I would be very interested in. There seems to be a strong and positive relationship, but not as strong as maybe I would have hoped for. I would have hoped to see.
And again, an interesting thing about how we have operationalized our variables here is that number of reflection styles isn't exactly the same as amount of reflection in a course. We don't really have good data to analyze the question in that way, but I suspect that if we did, that we would find a similar answer. I think it would seem likely to me that we might also find a positive correlation, and maybe that would be where we would get the stronger correlation. Not totally clear.
And thinking about the question itself and how a student might be thinking about their answers to a question. I mean, there is a substantive difference between a 1-page reflection and a 7-page reflection paper. There's a substantive difference between one discussion forum where you only do a 100-word post versus a longer thread that goes throughout the semester. So, I mean, we ask for different types, but again, the substance of each type, the length, all of that,
it doesn't directly capture either quality or quantity.
Yeah, which might be something for us to think about.
Different measure entirely.
Okay, so for hypothesis number 3, this is where we actually look to see if the number of reflection styles significantly predict the scores for learning outcomes. And
so we just did the correlation for the same relationship among variables.
And then now we did the regression analysis.
This is the regression, right?
Yeah, and the regression analysis showed that the model provides a good fit for the data. That number of reflection styles do predict stronger learning outcomes, but again, the effect size itself is smaller than I think we would like, but still, just all these things to consider. What can we do next to try to maybe gauge that a little bit better, get more information about within the number of reflection styles, what creates real impact for the students. We will also look at significant differences in mean scores between non-service learning students and service learning students in terms of learning outcomes. And again, we looked at them for each outcome, we were looking at students who said that service learning was not shared in the course, those are the yellow ones. Those that said that yes, they remember 1 to 3 types of reflection, and then the final group it says, yeah, they remember 4 more types of reflection. And so you see this result here as well. So again, just overall, I think the finding is definitely if you have the opportunity to use different numbers of reflection styles, that seems to have to be having a positive effect not only on students' learning outcomes, but also obviously in students' perception of the professor being able to integrate service learning into the course.
And really that we're seeing those impacts for the non-service learners. They don't actually
Yeah.
have to do the service experience.
But we want
to be
them-
able to,
we
to
want
get
them.
something out of it if they're hearing from the students who did do service.
If you are obviously, if this is something that you are invested in, you want obviously all your students to take advantage of doing service learning and the opportunities that offer. But if that's not possible, the next best thing you can as a professor is to make that reflection communal in a way, so that the other students are learning and are understanding not only the benefits, but what are the implications for what they're studying when you actually think about the society at large, the communities that are being affected, and all of that.
So just to wrap up our discussion slide, even though we found pretty small effect sizes, particularly looking at kind of the number of reflection styles and kind of that as a predictor of learning outcomes, it does seem to be the case that using different types of reflection and kind of that repetition of the reflection is beneficial as a way to sort of integrate that service into the course, but also to raise learning outcomes. And we found that service learning participants and non-participants alike, so again, all people in designated service learning courses, but those who did service and those who didn't, both of them can benefit in terms of learning outcomes when service learning experiences are shared, when there's a lot of reflection done. So there you go.
Yeah. So we hope, there's an appendix. You can see more information. We're going to make this available to you so that you can see and spend more time with the results. But I hope.
Can you just pull up the references slide too so they can look at that if they're interested? Here's our lit review.
For the effect or the literature on reflection styles and learning outcomes. But we hope that this presentation has maybe given you ideas of other types of engaged scholarship that you can do. There's so much data, and we're just starting to scratch the surface with this. I'm sure there are other really interesting angles that faculty can think about. So we welcome your input. We hope that this has been valuable to you, and feel free to reach out to Kate. Kate, you want to?
Yeah, I'd also say that for those of you who might have been interested in the idea of incorporating further reflection or sort of experimenting with new styles of reflection in your course, we have really good resources available on how to think about reflection. We have really good workbooks with sort of examples of different types of reflection activities you can do in class. And so Jean Lee Cole and I would be delighted to meet with any of you to share those resources.
Okay, so that's the end of our presentation. We're hoping that you're having a great semester, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.